This solution is 90% cheaper than upgrading all the wires in Minnesota. Now we're arguing about whether this could have been 10% cheaper than the private sector solution. Okay, but we have a controlled experiment going on between Excel Minnesota and Excel Colorado. We'll see how that goes over the next 3 years, and then we can adjust.
We know the grid is undergoing massive change, which creates massive opportunities for local energy. The Energy Changemakers podcast offers rich conversations with industry leaders to help you and your company capture opportunities to build a decentralized grid. I'm your host, Elisa Wood. Welcome to the Energy Changemakers podcast.
Hey everyone, Elisa Wood here from Energy Changemakers. I hardly need to introduce my guest today. Jigar Shah is one of the most well-known and influential people in clean energy. He's been recasting the industry for decades, going back to when he started the solar company SunEdison and introduced to the market the Solar Power Purchase Agreement, a widely used mechanism credited with a lot of the industry's growth. Since then, he's played significant roles in climate, investment, and government, and become a well-known media figure in our space. If you've listened to him over the years, you know he's been notoriously critical of utilities. But in this conversation, he takes, to me, what is a surprising stand on a utility program in Minnesota that's become a lightning rod among distributed energy players, particularly those who favor a competitive market. It's interesting stuff. Here's what Jigar had to say.
Hey, Jigar Shah, how are you today?
Hey, it's been too long. How are you?
Always love talking to you. Conversations with you always leave me walking away thinking about lots of things.
Well, we've been doing them for almost 20 years.
Exactly. I was thinking that. In fact, I think the first time I spoke to you was just before SunEdison did the Whole Foods project. I was writing for Renewable Energy World then, and you had this great new business model.
Yeah.
Congratulations. It seemed to work out.
Thanks. I think that PPA was a 20-year PPA. I think we finally finished it.
Very cool. You know, we saw each other at Dervos a couple of years ago. At that point, you were working at the loan office. And I said to you, why are you doing this? Because honestly, given your career, you could be doing anything you wanted right now. And you chose to go work for government. So tell me about your background, where you started, and why you decided to eventually move into government.
Well, look, I was born in India in a village that barely had electricity and running water. When my brother was born 3 years later, my mom took us back to India. And so I grew up there for another year when I was between 3 and 4 years old. And this is a place, obviously, that I come back to regularly as a first-generation immigrant. And so, I think the notion that the work that we do in the United States is divorced from all of these other markets has never been my worldview. I mean, I've always thought about the work that we did here in the United States having extraordinary benefits to people who lived around the world, right? And so when we perfect something here, then that technology might even be more cost effective to deploy elsewhere. For me, commercialization is not just from California to Texas. Commercialization is from California to Texas to Ethiopia. And so that really drives me, I think.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's a timely thing to say, too, given that the World Energy Outlook is out from IEA. And once again, showing there's this massive number of people that still don't even have electricity, which we tend to forget in this country.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the thing that I am always just so amazed by is that we have hundreds, if not thousands, of extraordinary companies in the U.S. venture capital ecosystem that have gotten research grants from the U.S. Department of Energy, that have done all sorts of interesting stuff. And they actually have solutions that are worth scaling. And I think for a long time, there was not really a partner in the U.S. government that wanted to help them scale, not because the U.S. government hated them, but just more that they didn't have the tools to help them scale. And I was asked to join the Biden administration to help correct that. And I was reticent to join because Generate Capital was doing well. And so it was certainly not on my dance card to go into public service. But, I'm a patriotic guy. And I think when you get asked by the incoming president to serve, I think you have to take that seriously. And so I made up of a list of what I thought were impossible asks of the administration, saying, here are all the things I think need fixing for me to be successful. And to their credit, they accepted all of those things. And obviously, they didn't know the full extent of what they were accepting, but they certainly suggested that they were open to the government running in a more private sector friendly way. And so I thought it was worth diving into the public sector. And I think we largely accomplished our goals, which was to create this partnership between the private sector and the US Department of Energy and then the broader US government to help people do big things and scale up their technologies here in the United States. Because when I was in the startup community, people laughed at you if you wanted to build stuff in the United States. I mean, you really had to go to Asia to scale up your technologies. So I think the fact that post the Biden administration, people are now looking to Georgia or Tennessee or South Carolina or Texas to manufacture is a big outcome.
It must have been a tough transition for you. A year ago, a little more than a year ago, you were just going like full tilt. How much loan money did your office give out?
We approved or conditionally accepted 107.5 billion. So it
Which
was a lot.
was like, yeah, nothing like the Department of Energy had ever done before.
Sure.
And so you were going all out on that. And then suddenly it just stopped. What was that like for you personally? How were you feeling during that time after the election?
It was fine. I mean, look, my career has been filled with this, right? So it's not
Mhm.
like the loan programs office is the first time this has happened to me. When I sold SunEdison, right, MEMC drove SunEdison into the ground and bankrupted it,
Mhm.
right? But I don't think that the work that we did at SunEdison was lost. I still think that we helped establish solar financing throughout the world and that the alumni from SunEdison continue to do major and important things around the world. The Carbon War Room got merged into the Rocky Mountain Institute, and I think that was quite a successful merger. But like Generate Capital, after I left, had some real stumbles. But I still think that Generate Capital changed the business model forever around how you think about supporting this first of a kind scale up for a lot of different technologies. And I think the same thing's true with the Loan Programs Office, right? So for as much as the Trump administration tried to badmouth the good work we did, I think they still have see that American entrepreneurs expect more from our government today than they did before the Biden administration. And even the Trump administration has been truly impressed by how much the expectations are from American entrepreneurs. And they've risen to meet those expectations, right? They've provided funding from the Department of War. They've closed some loans from the Loan Programs Office. I think the secretary just announced that they're going to reposition all the money from the Loan Programs Office into new nuclear. Like whatever it is that they want to do with it, they never once suggested that they were going to shut down the Loan Programs Office.
So it continues. Yeah, I think one of the things that's fascinating to me about this whole space is its, to use an overused word, resilience. You know, you see it run into roadblocks, whether they're government or funding or investment or policy, whatever, and they figure out how to innovate around it. And sometimes these innovations are accepted by many, and sometimes they're very controversial. And there's one out there now that I want to talk to you about. And it's been proposed by Spark Fund. It's called Distributed Capacity Procurement, and it is being rolled out by Xcel Energy in Minnesota. And this is a controversial one because basically what they're doing is something that this DER space sometimes really doesn't like. They're allowing the utilities to own the space. So the utility is putting in batteries on the transmission level to bolster the grid, basically. So it's DERs used to bolster the grid. And it's controversial because on the one hand, you see folks in the DER community saying, this is great. This is going to scale DERs because now we've got this utility backing it and we can come in and we can, bid on these projects and do this. And then there's others who are saying, no, 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 no. Utility involvement is a really tricky thing. They're going to squash the market. It's going to be too expensive. It's going to take too long. So as somebody who's been through so many of these kind of wars, I'm really curious how you see this most recent one.
Yeah, I mean, some of these controversies are just completely made up and some of them are substantive, right? So when you look at the history of Minnesota specifically, you're in a situation where, Michael Noble and I have been good friends for a very long time. And
Mhm.
Michael called me after I sold SunEdison and said, hey, I want to really make Minnesota a solar state, right? And we did a bunch of work, and I put together the spreadsheet for him, and we created the value of solar study. Remember that concept?
Yeah, well, sure.
In Minnesota, right? We did all this great work, right? And so I think we did it the way that John Farrell wanted to do it. We're at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I've been a donor to John Farrell's work for a lot of years, right? I think the world of him.
Mhm.
But I think that at some point, we got to the point where Generate Capital was investing $1,000 a kilowatt hour into new battery systems, right? Now those batteries are now $100 a kilowatt hour, right? At least for the cell.
Mhm.
And then when you package it up into megapacks, it's like $250 a kilowatt hour delivered. And if it's a commercial battery, maybe it's $500 a kilowatt hour delivered. And if it's a residential battery, it's still $1,100 a kilowatt hour delivered. And people have been deploying it and all this other stuff. But there's all these friction points where the utility company is saying, we don't really have the data. We don't really have the ability to dispatch the batteries. We don't have all these issues, et cetera, et cetera. And, we know for a fact that we can meet 100% of the load growth in the United States, given that we're already building new solar and wind and natural gas plants and other stuff, if we just added $50 billion worth of batteries across the country,
Mhm.
right? If you put them on the right distribution circuits and you put them in the right place, then we could solve all load growth through 2030 and fully integrate it into the grid with the business as usual case that we are currently on. Great. Now the question becomes, what is the best way to get the utilities and the regulators and the governors on board with this? In Xcel Minnesota's case, they came forward and said, hey, we would love to own these batteries. They were the first, by the way. Like SparkFund was trying to get 5 other utilities to do this. And they
Mhm.
all said, maybe, we'll see, whatever else. And Xcel Minnesota raised their hand and said, you know what, this is a great concept. We're going to do this. I applaud Xcel Minnesota for wanting to be first. I mean, you and I know that the utilities have not really been a hotbed of deployment of innovation. So the fact that Xcel wanted to do this warms my heart. I think that's great. Separately, Xcel Colorado has been pushed by the state legislature and the Public Service Commission there to do a more distributed private sector led approach in Colorado, right? So now you
Mhm.
have ability to compare the Xcel Minnesota experience with the Xcel Colorado experience. And there's a new nonprofit, I think, called Common Charge that's been put together, and they're going to try to push a lot of these solutions.
Yep.
I think it's wonderful that we have finally established that $50 billion worth of batteries is cheaper than the $550 billion that the utilities want to spend between now and 2029 to accommodate all this load growth their way, right? Fighting that battleground. We're now fighting, do we want the utilities to own the equipment, or do we want the private sector to own the equipment and respond to signals? That feels like extraordinary progress to me.
Very true. So, one of the big concerns, and I've heard you talk about this before, is utilities do not tend to be great with innovation. It's just not in their DNA. It's not what they were created to do, really. And I think one of the big concerns about this project is that we're handing something really important over to utilities who just don't have a great track record in this regard. But you sound optimistic. You sound optimistic on this one.
But in what regard are we saying that they don't have a good track record?
Well, if you look at most of the DER work that's gone on, I'll use microgrids for an example, utilities have been pretty slow to the game.
Right, but we're not talking about them being slow to the game here. I think what you're saying, maybe with your question, is that the utility is going to screw this up,
Okay,
right?
sure.
I don't think you're saying that they're going to be slow. I think you're saying that they're not going to deploy the batteries well, or they're not going to dispatch them well, or they're not going to get the most out of the batteries. And I don't think there's any data to suggest that's true. The utilities, once they do deploy stuff, I think generally, like integrated into their system. They have a regulator that looks at it, et cetera. Now, there's certainly areas where they haven't unlocked features. So like when they've rolled out smart grids, smart
Mhm.
meters, they unlocked the feature that allowed them to save money, right? Dispatching meter readers, right? They don't do that anymore, and they saved a lot of money by going to smart meters. But they didn't unlock the green button, orange button, blue button
Mhm.
stuff to dispatch the data. And so that, I think, is a minus point for utilities. And so in this case, what you could imagine is the utilities using it to add load to distribution circuits faster, right, which is the whole point of the DCP, I think, is to
Mhm.
promote economic growth faster in Minnesota. But to the extent that there are 4 other value streams to stack, you could suggest that maybe they'll be slow to stack those other four value streams.
I don't think they're stacking resilience at all, right? There's no resilience to this. It's purely grid. They'll be on commercial properties, the batteries, but the commercial property doesn't get to use the battery for backup in any way.
So you're saying that it's not tied in behind the meter. It's
Right.
tied in front of the meter.
It's front of the meter, yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they won't use it for resilience. There's lots of things that occur in a utility. Like if you were to do this in PG&E's territory, right, there are public safety shutoff events that occur, right? You could imagine the batteries being useful in that context.
Yeah, I just mean they will not use them for the commercial building. I'm sure there'll be grid resilience, but the building doesn't get to use them. So that's, I guess, that's one of the complaints about this. One of the criticisms is not really providing any kind of local energy, which is a key
But
benefit of.
what if they did? Then would everybody be happy? Like what if
Ha!
in phase 2 of the rollout, because this is phase 1 right now, right? And there's like a
Right.
phase 2 and 3. So what if in phase 2 they got the commercial customers to agree to put it behind their meter, and they could use up to 50% of the battery's capacity for demand charge savings, right? I think is what you're talking about a little bit.
And I think that
And
would be
then
something that would be more acceptable, I think, to people.
would it be more
I
acceptable
think it would.
if the utility owned the batteries?
Yeah, they don't want them to own the batteries. That's absolutely true. But lack of local benefit is another concern, right? That you're using these batteries not to their full extent.
I think the utility's open to that. Like, I feel like in general, look, I have been withering in my criticism of the utilities. So like, I'm not the guy to turn to like defend the utilities. But I am the guy who's saying that I have been talking about DERs and VPPs for my entire career. I certainly have ramped it up in a big way since I was on the Energy Gang podcast since 2013, and certainly in a huge way since I was at the Department of Energy when we wrote the VPP liftoff reports and the Grid Enhancing Technologies liftoff reports, right? The
Great
innovative.
report, by the way. Yeah.
Thanks. And so I want these technologies to proliferate. And I think that the notion that the Excel Minnesota DCP contract is preventing other business models from proliferating across the country is poppycock. I mean, there's so many business models proliferating, and we did 75 case studies in the VPP liftoff report that we published, the updated one in January of 2025. So, let 1,000 flowers bloom. And if Excel Minnesota doesn't achieve the goals that we set out for them, then we'll force them to switch to a different business model.
So do you have a problem with the cost of the program?
No, of course not. I find that people get super exact. Like when I was a kid, I remember my math teacher telling me to be wary of people who talk with too many significant digits, right? What are we doing? This solution is 90% cheaper than upgrading all the wires in Minnesota, right?
Point.
So now we're arguing about whether this could have been 10% cheaper than the private sector solution. Okay, but we have a controlled experiment going on between Excel Minnesota and Excel Colorado. We'll see how that goes over the next 3 years, and then we can adjust.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to be on my show in 3 years, and let's pick this up again. I want to see where it goes.
Well, I think given our history, I will most certainly be on your show in 3 years for lots of reasons.
Let's pivot to something else I wanted to ask you. So right now we're in this strange place in the power industry where we have a lot of people bemoaning the loss of the federal tax incentives under the Trump administration and feeling like that's really harming the renewable energy movement. We see offshore wind farms being pushed and pulled. And then on the other side of this market, we've got this, oh my God, we've got electric demand growing for the first time. We've got data centers looking for power. And it's creating this strange kind of environment where you've got people who are depressed and gleeful at the same time.
Well, I think that's the history of the solar industry. So I don't know that it's unique to this moment. The solar coaster means that 50% of our brothers and sisters go out of business in every cycle, and the other 50% rise to the occasion and take their market share.
Yeah, what makes this time a little bit different, I think, though, is that we actually have load growth going on. This is new for the United States.
Sure.
And it's incredibly exciting for the industry. And they see so much opportunity. But again, on the other hand, they're saying, oh, but we lost the tax credits.
Well, they're not saying that, to be clear. Like 50% of people are saying, my business has never been better, and I have a rock solid pathway to reduce my cost by 35%. So I'm golden. And then 50% of people are saying, I have to do things exactly the same way I did last year, and I can't improve anything about my business. And those folks, I have counseled them and I've said, please take as much profit off the table as you can by the end of this year. And then you should shut your doors and pay off all your debts, right? Don't stay in business because you will most certainly go bankrupt.
So, for those who can weather this and are weathering it, what do you see as the key strategies they're using? Is it financial mechanisms? Is it
No,
pursuing certain parts of the market? What are they doing?
they're tightening their belts.
Mm.
Everybody knows that we have double the costs in the United States as they have in Germany. We have 3x the costs in the United States versus Australia. Gosh darn it, like it's time for the US to tighten its belt. Figure out how to get to the same damn costs. Like maybe we can never match Australia for lots of safety reasons. Like we have a lot of more safety regulations than Australia has. But we have a paper that Tesla put out recently that showed that they thought that you could get $1 a watt out of residential solar. I mean, certainly there are many other folks who've put that down to. Ravi Mickelson from Atmos Financial has an entire club of around 10% of the entire solar industry that have signed up to reach $2 a watt residential solar by the end of 2026. So that's great. I think on the C&I side, I think you see something similar. C&I solar has never been stronger. I think this year we're up 27% compared to last year. So I think that's great. I think on the battery side, people are making all the batteries by hand in commercial solar. And so I've heard from a lot of commercial battery manufacturers that if they started getting 50 batteries a month of orders, that they could drop their cost by 25%.
Hmm.
So that's wonderful, right? I think you've got high demand charges today. So like demand charges were $25 a kW 4 years ago. Now they're $45 a kW
Mhm.
in some markets. And so as a result, batteries have like a 4-year payback for those folks
Right.
just on demand charge savings. Look, I told everybody in 2022 and 2023 at RE Plus, you are no longer the solar and battery storage industry. You are now the battery storage and solar industry. I have said that consistently since 2022. I believe it today. The OBBB extended the tax credit for batteries through 2034. So the entire solar industry is now the battery storage industry that happens to refuel the batteries sometimes with solar panels, which is great.
Very good. It's always good to hear a positive, I mean, because we hear a lot of negative stuff these days. So it's good to hear your perspective. It's very positive. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. I'm going to ask you to become the governor of New Jersey and the governor of Virginia. We have 2 new governors, Cheryl and Spanberger. If you were them, what maybe 3 energy policy initiatives would you want to enact today? What would you suggest they do?
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is to set a goal. And the goal should be to reduce everyone's electricity bills 20% by 2030. Full stop. Right? If you have load growth, that means that the number of kilowatt hours you're selling is going up. That means you could spread the costs of maintaining the grid over more kilowatt hours.
Mhm.
That means that you can drop everyone's bills 20% by 2030, right?
Sounds great. Yeah.
What does that take? That means that you have to implement the liftoff reports that we published. That means that you have to get more out of the grid we've already paid for. So that means, 3 things. You have to interconnect projects faster. That means copying Texas. That means you have to fully deploy all the grid enhancing technologies, right? Dynamic line ratings and topology mapping and all that stuff, which means getting more out of the transmission grid we've already paid for. And it means deploying a crap load of batteries, technical term, to get more out of the distribution grid we've already paid for. That's it. And if you do that, you can demand that the utilities spend 1/10 of what they were expecting to spend to accommodate all the load growth. And if they spend 1/10 the amount, they still have to spend 100% of the maintenance CapEx, which is half of their entire budget. But for the other half of the budget that they were planning to spend on load growth, that can be reduced by 90%. And if they do that, then they can successfully reduce everyone's bills 20% by 2030.
So what about the idea, and particularly in terms of solar, there's a lot of talk now about getting the soft costs down. Do you think we can significantly do that? Will that make a big difference?
Well, that's below the fold. I don't know that the governor cares about that, right? What the governor cares about is getting people's bills down 20% by 2030. Then there's a whole staff of people who have to make that happen. But remember, we're moving to the solar industry becoming the battery industry. So this is about deploying batteries and dispatching them at peak times. The solar is a way to refuel the batteries that's cheaper than buying power from the grid.
Good point. Okay, so now that we've given them advice, next time we talk, 4 or 5 years from now, what will your title be? What will you be doing career-wise? Where do you want to be?
Well, I mean, I've always been blessed by doing really cool things. I'd say that right now, what I'm doing is helping the clean tech sector deploy, right? We are in a place where we have invented so much stuff since you and I have been covering this over the last 20 years. And it is time for our stuff to be featured prominently in solving this problem of affordability. I mean, we have a lot of our brothers and sisters around this country that are hurting on energy burden. And we want to make sure that we have this ability to keep electricity costs below 6% of their total overall household budget. And we can do that, right? We have the technologies to do it. But in the past, the utility companies weren't really pressured to be our partners on this. I think they are today. And so I want to educate a lot of the companies on how to work with the utilities. I want to educate the regulators on how to hold them accountable. I want to educate governors and legislatures on how to pass laws to align everyone's interests. I want to make sure that all of these companies are making a lot of money, right? Because Lord Almighty, if they don't make a lot of money, then the next generation of entrepreneurs aren't going to get funded, right? So like right now, I want to make sure that the wealth creation part of doing well by doing good is getting done. Because Lord knows we have so many people that are doing good in the world, but they're not always making a lot of money.
So it sounds like you're saying that you want to be doing in 4 to 5 years what you're doing now, unless you think we will actually get those things done in 4 to 5 years?
I don't know that we'll ever be done. I think we'll be on the next frontier of companies that need help. But I think that if we can figure out how to get all of these extraordinary companies and these extraordinary ideas deployed at scale, then we can actually make electricity affordable for all, which you and I both know is essential if we're going to electrify everything. And if that occurs, then all of these companies can have big exits, which is what I want for them. I love the fact that these people are all mission-driven and purpose-driven, and they're doing good in the world. But damn it, I think that they should be able to get rich too.
Sounds good. I don't think anybody will disagree with you. Jigar, this has been such a great conversation. Thank you for everything you do for this industry. I know you're deeply appreciated, and I appreciate you being on the show.
Well, it's always my pleasure, and thank you for all you do. I learned so much from consuming your content, and so thanks for all the hard work you put into that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today on the Energy Changemakers podcast. I hope today's conversation has inspired you to think differently about the role of distributed energy in our society. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and consider leaving us a review. You can help us shape the dialogue around energy. Go to energychangemakers.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and join our community. Together, we can make a real difference in how quickly we can make our grid local, equitable, and clean.